A long-planned trip suddenly has Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince wading into the spiraling storm between India and Pakistan. The first stop was Islamabad. The red carpet rolled out for Mohammed bin Salman for a state visit where he promised $20 billion in much-needed investment. Pakistani security officials have been glowing. They see a chance to restore ties between the two Sunni powers to what they were before the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif refused to take part in the Saudi-led campaign in Yemen. Next, it'll be on to India, where the Prime Minister has vowed to avenge, quote, every tear from last week's worst ever terror attack in Indian-administered Kashmir. At least 40 paramilitary forces killed in an attack attributed to an al-Qaeda-affiliated group based in Pakistan. Can MBS really play peace broker, as the Saudis claim? How far will the backlash go against Pakistan on the part of India after attacks had happened in the run-up to India's general election? We'll also look at how regional players are lining up, from Saudi Arabia's arch-rival Iran, which blames Pakistan for stoking militant attacks on its side of the border, to China, the last stop on the Crown Prince's tour. China, which stands by Islamabad. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at MBS's trip going from Pakistan to India. With us, India's ambassador to France, Vinay Mohan Kwatra. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for calling us. Thanks for inviting.
From Washington, Kamran Bokhari, director of the Center for Global Policy. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Jean-Luc Racine is a senior fellow at the Asia Center here in Paris. How are you?
Well, good evening.
France24.com senior editor Leela Jacinto has been writing on the subject. Thanks for joining us as well.
Nice to be here.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Ambassador, let me begin with the latest, which is that it was originally supposed to be a flight from Islamabad to New Delhi. Instead, the Saudi Crown Prince deciding to return back to Saudi Arabia before traveling on to the Indian capital. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I would first of all like to thank you for inviting me onto the show. I think it would not be correct really for me to speak about the MBS visit to Pakistan, because that is a context which is defined by the relationship between those two countries. But I think I would like to touch upon what you earlier referred to in the beginning of your remarks, which is you mentioned that MBS visit is taking place in a certain context in the region. And I think it is important that people understand fully well what is the context of those developments. I think if you currently visit India, you read any of the publications that come out from India, you listen to the commentaries that are all over the media from India, you will find that there is a deep sense of grief and absolutely shock and outrage at the recent terrorist incident in Pulwama in Jammu and Kashmir. It has been condemned by most responsible members of the international community. In fact, I have with me here the statement which Foreign Minister Yves Le Drian released at
the French Foreign Minister.
French Foreign Minister. C'est je condamne avec la plus grande fermeté l'attaque ignoble. He condemns with
absolute firmness.
Absolute firmness the attacks. Now the facts of this attack are very well known. But what is, if I could just complete that plot, what is important for us to realize is that this is yet another manifestation of use of terrorism by Pakistan as an instrument of state policy. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, if I elaborate in very simple terms, it means that I create an instrument, I have a belief in that instrument that violence perpetrated by that instrument in another country gives me political gains. Now, this particular incident is a clear manifestation. We think that in today's context, what is happening in India, especially in context of this attack, if you take a coin, I think Pakistan and terrorism are two sides of this one coin. There is an organic link between the two. There is a constant glorification of terrorism, which gets done by Pakistan. There are ample history.
That's a serious accusation.
It's actually now a fact, in fact, internationally acknowledged, if I could put it that way.
So, what is the concrete evidence we have that in this case? What are you suggesting, that Pakistan ordered the attack? Is that what you're saying?
Well, let me put it this way. What are the facts which are already available in the public domain if you were to look at? There is a video which has already been put out by the perpetrator of the attack, and he openly says in that video that he's from Jaish-e-Mohammed, JEM. Now, we know where the masters of JEM sit. Everybody knows that. We know who are their handlers. We know who are they supported by. I think it is
just to be clear, who are the masters of JEM?
Well, the headquarters of the Jaish-e-Mohammed is sitting in Pakistan, and it is supported by the Pakistani state government apparatus, by different agencies in the Pakistani state government apparatus. We have no doubt in our mind, and as said, this has been publicly accepted and announced by the perpetrator of the attack itself, that JEM has claimed responsibility for this. Its supporters are sitting in Pakistan, and I don't think there is any doubt about it that this is a clear act of cross-border terrorism instigated from across the border and supported by Pakistan.
Supported by Pakistan. Kamran Bokhari, your thoughts?
I think that is accurate, largely. I am not sure whether, to what extent the security establishment in Pakistan currently controls such groups, because we know for a fact that the Pakistani military and its intelligence service have been attacked by these same actors or similar actors, and the state has waged a counterinsurgency offensive in the country. In the past, the Pakistanis have openly supported groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Tayyiba, and whatnot. My only concern now is that, to what extent is this official state policy? In other words, are the orders given for such attacks by officials of Pakistan's inter-services intelligence and or the army, or are these actors allowed to operate from Pakistani soil and they conduct their own operations, of course, with some level of support from the state? So those are two separate things. It's not really clear to me because of the evolution and the opaque nature of the phenomenon and the dynamic that we researchers have to deal with.
Leela Jacinto?
I think, what both our guests have said is fairly well known. Jaish-e-Mohammed is based in Pakistan. But, this is a very long insurgency. And for people who follow the insurgency, it's actually interesting because the head of Jaish-e-Mohammed is Maulana Masood Azhar, who was actually in Indian custody and was released by the Indians, by the previous BJP government, in a hijacking deal where these militants were actually released by India. But in any case, these, as Kamran says, it's very murky. And what happens with states like Pakistan and Iran, you have the deep state, you have the government saying one thing. But I think it's,
So how do we make sense of it then?
Well, I think more than how do we make sense of it, it's the more important thing is where do we go from here? We are weeks before a general election. A campaign season is always a very intricate and delicate time when these kind of attacks happen. It whips up sentiments on either side. And de-escalating the crisis is what is necessary. And the Saudi foreign minister in Pakistan was speaking to reporters and said that Saudi Arabia would try to de-escalate the situation. But, this is a long-standing crisis, so good luck to him. However, Saudi Arabia does have considerable influence in Islamabad. It must be said that New Delhi, the relationship with Saudi Arabia is changing. In the old days, it was a very ideological relationship. Indian Prime Minister Modi is much more into a sort of a non-ideological, so there could be some room for Saudi Arabia to play a role. But the Kashmir crisis is like the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. These crises have gone on for decades.
Jean-Luc Racine?
Well, yes, I think one has to put that in perspective because even if the incident is particularly serious, it's not the first time that these kind of things happen. And we have more or less always the same scenario. On the one hand, you have the Pakistani government saying, India is accusing us even before the investigation has started, so please keep us informed about the investigation, and if we have real information, we'll act. The problem is that one of the key issues for New Delhi is that following a range of terrorist attacks within India, either in Kashmir proper, or we have to remember the Mumbai attack of 2008 with 166 dead. Behind this attack in Bombay, we had already the Jaish-e-Mohammed. And at that time, the question was the same in a way. What will be the reaction of India? And the reaction of India at that time was simply to put an end to the dialogue which has been conveyed for years. So here there is something different, of course, because there is no serious dialogue. Between 2004 and 2007, under General Musharraf on the Pakistani side and the BJP government on the Indian side, there were official negotiations on a range of issues and discrete, unofficial negotiation on Kashmir. And it seems that both sides were arriving to some sort of hypothetical compromise. The case is that very often, anytime you have a signal that something may go to the right direction, you have a terrorist attack. The last one was after Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, went almost unexpectedly to Lahore, where the Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif was celebrating his birthday. It was seen as a signal of perhaps things will go better. 10 days after, there was an attack.
So how do you explain the timing this time around? You heard Leela talk about the fact that you've elections coming up in India. Is that what this is about?
Here the timing is a little more difficult to interpret because, yes, a few days ago or a couple of weeks ago, the Pakistani Prime Minister and the Chief of Army Staff, General Bajwa, both of them in Islamabad said, we are for peace with India. But it was not exactly the same possible progress that we have seen in the past. So it's difficult to guess really with some sort of certitude in a way. If there was something specifically planned as far as the calendar is concerned, or if it was something which was managed mostly from Kashmir. The young boy who blew himself up was from the locality. He was 21. He has joined the Jaish-e-Mohammed 1 year before, but he was a local. It was not Mumbai where the terrorists came from Pakistan across the sea to attack Mumbai city. So all that is, in fact, in the background and in the mind of everyone on both sides of the border and on both sides of the land of control in Kashmir.
Let me ask Kamran Bokhari, what do you make of the timing of this?
I think it's interesting in the sense that it comes at a time when the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was making a visit to Pakistan. It's also interesting because it comes within days of the attack on the IRGC troops in Iran by a group, again, a Pakistan-based group called Jaish-ul-Adl, which is fighting Tehran. It's a Sunni Islamist and ethnically Baloch group that has in the past conducted attacks, and the Iranians had expressed their concerns with the Pakistanis. And in fact, there were some reports that the Iranians even conducted a cross-border operation a couple of years ago, striking at Jaish-ul-Adl facilities.
But let me just ask you about that, because it's all the way at the other end of Pakistan. So can you connect the dots between the two?
No, I'm just saying that there is a timing. You asked about the timing, and I'm saying these are the events that it comes, very close to. And sometimes, most of the time, look, we're dealing, what we know for sure is that, look, Jaish-e-Mohammed is not going to coordinate with Jaish al-Adl. It has no reason to. It has its own logic. We have seen Jaish-e-Mohammed attack in Pathankot, in the Uri military base in September of 2016. Pathankot was 6 or 7 months before that. So they have their own cycle of violence, and they're based in an area that is on one end of Pakistan. And Jaish al-Adl is in a very, very remote area of Pakistan along the border with Iran. So I don't see any connections with that. But I just find it that the timing brings about, these are sort of unintended consequences that take place where I guess there are incidents in which bring more pressure onto Pakistan. All of this is happening in the backdrop of the Afghan government complaining that the Taliban have enjoyed sanctuary in Pakistan. And now we're having negotiations, and those negotiations are complicated because of that. A few years ago, the Chinese used to have a problem that there are, sanctuaries for Uyghur Islamist militants in Pakistan's tribal areas. So when we talk about geography and we talk about the pressures that come, that's the context in which I'm speaking.
So added pressure, very quickly before we go to the break, Leela Jacinto, added pressure on Pakistan from several sides?
Absolutely. I mean, the geography of this place is the fault lines are amazing. The Iranian, the chief of the Revolutionary Guards, actually blamed Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates of funding these anti-Shiite groups that conducted the attack in Iran. And once again, the government sort of scaled back on that because you have the deep state and the government. But China, mentioning China is also a key player in this region. China has having a crackdown on its Uyghur Muslims, but it supports Pakistan at the UN as a sort of tool against India. So this is an extremely complicated region, and MBS sort of seems to think that he could just do petrodollar diplomacy in this area, and I'm not sure it would work here.
All right, we're going to put that to the ambassador when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at the spiraling tension between Pakistan and India, which happens to come at the same time as there was a long-scheduled visit by the Saudi Crown Prince MBS, first in Pakistan, next in India. India's ambassador to France, Vinay Mohan Kwatra, is with us. Welcome back. Welcome back as well from Washington, Kamran Bokhari, who is director of the Center for Global Policy. We're also in the company of Jean-Luc Racine, who is with the Asia Center here in Paris, and France 24's very own Leela Jacinto. The rising rhetoric palpable on both sides of the border in Kashmir. Go India, go back, go Modi, go back. They chanted several hundred in Muzaffarabad, that's the capital of Pakistani-administered Kashmir this Monday, while anti-Pakistan protests, like the one last Friday in Jammu, are on the rise in India, as well as calls to boycott cricket matches, Pakistani Bollywood actors, the Prime Minister, who has repeated warnings of reprisals.
I fully understand the anger in the country. People's blood is boiling because of this attack. The expectations that the country currently has, and the emotions to do something about this, are completely natural. We have given full freedom to our security forces.
How far will it go, Ambassador? Will it mean some kind of cross-border incursion?
Thanks. If you permit, I'll just like to come back to three other moving points which were made by the panelists prior to you went into break. One concerned with terror and talks. Other was the point which Mr. Bokhari made from Washington about connecting the dots in terms of terror incidents. You referred to Iranian incident, and he talked about connecting dots in that. And now the third point, which came across both from the panelists present here, was about the reaction, which is sort of going. So let me first pick up the terror and talks point of view, which I think is very important. I think if you go back 4 years, 2 years, 2 months, 2014 May, Prime Minister Modi takes oath of the government. And what is his first step which he takes? He invites all the heads of states and governments of South Asia to his swearing-in ceremony.
Including Nawaz Sharif.
The
Prime Minister of Pakistan at the time.
Then he travels to Afghanistan on a bilateral visit. And on his way back, he decides to make a stop in Pakistan. Again, goes across to the residence of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. Takes a tremendous risk of putting political capital, his own political capital risk, by undertaking these visits. What does India get in return? India gets in return continuing terrorist attacks. That is why I think our leadership has made it very clear. We are all for talks. We think disputes should ultimately be resolved through talks. And there is a mechanism between India and Pakistan to resolve those disputes, which is outlined in Shimla Agreement of 1972 and the Lahore Declaration of 1999. But we are also very clear that talks cannot go ahead if the terror continues.
So what's going to be the response now?
So now coming to the second point, which is relating to the response. I think if you look at the Prime Minister's reaction immediately after the Pulwama attacks, he clearly said that in addition to condemning the attack, that the bloods of the CRPF soldiers who died in this attack, it will not go in vain. We from our side are absolutely committed to take all measures necessary for the protection of our sovereignty and territorial integrity from the cross-border terrorism. At this stage, I think that should suffice. May I just, if with your permission, take 30 seconds to, yes, I know it is very, sometimes very attractive to perhaps link it to the upcoming elections in India. I think, in my personal view, it will probably be trivializing the death of 40 people if you say that there is a reaction to that is linked to in any way to the election. I think it's a plain and simple terror incident which has evoked massive grief and outrage in India. And I think government would assess all its options based on that. And Prime Minister's own statement is, I think, quite clear on that one.
Kamran Bokhari, what are you expecting as a response?
Well, I mean, in the last surgical strike that the Indians claimed, it wasn't really clear what happened. The Pakistanis claimed that it was, firing across the border. The Indians maintained that they sent in forces and took out several terrorist facilities in Pakistani-administered Kashmir. But we really don't know what really happened back then. I suspect that we're going to see some form of action. It could be a surgical strike. That will depend on how good the intelligence is. And of course, the Indians would not want to lose more lives in that process, much less trigger a broader conflict. So the question here is, what can India do to basically satisfy the need for retaliation and telegraph to Pakistan that it's not going to tolerate business as usual. But then the flip side is, does that unleash or a tit for tat, and where does that go? So that's the big question, and I think that something will happen. I'm pretty convinced of that. And with all due respect to the ambassador, I will say that while I agree with him about the atrociousness and the senseless killing of the CRPF personnel, but I think that domestic politics does play a role, and I think that the Prime Minister is under immense pressure, not just because of anger. That's there. It's definitely there. But there's also a domestic political compulsion, which means that we're likely to see some form of a strike. We don't know its details. And since we don't have a precedent, the only precedent that we have is what happened in September of 2016. And like I said, it never became clear what really took place.
Jean-Luc Racine, your thoughts on that, going on what's happened in the past?
Well, what's happened in the past may eventually be repeated right now. But for the time being, the government of India, the first step was just to cancel the most favored nation status for trade between India and Pakistan, but it's merely symbolic because the trade is almost nil. The Indian policy officially was we'll do our best to diplomatically isolate Pakistan. But as it has been already underlined, one, MBS is there. Two, the Americans need Pakistan for carrying on their talk with the Taliban.
Okay, so let me ask you about this, because on Saturday, Donald Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, he tweeted about his phone call with his Indian counterpart. And it was very strong wording. He said, Pakistan must crack down on JEM and all terrorists operating from its territories. Countries should uphold the UN Security Council responsibilities to deny safe haven and support for terrorists. When you have...
we hear that for 10, 15 or 20 years.
That's nothing new. The Trump administration hasn't invented anything.
But it's really the issue seen as I see it from India, which is it's difficult to know, as it was mentioned before, if really the Pakistani survivors were directly behind the attack. That's not really the only point. The point which would be theoretically easy to solve would be really for Pakistan closing for once and for good the jihadist factory, be they the Jaish-e-Mohammed or the Lashkar-e-Taiba. Both of them have leaders known for decades. Both leaders move freely in Pakistan, make public speeches, and this is the point which is not moving attack after attack.
Kamran Bokhari, you agree?
I do, and I think that there are two sides to sort of this entire dynamic. One of the things that we've not talked about is that the Pakistanis exploit a situation inside Indian Kashmir, which is that there is a disenfranchisement, or at least a sense of disenfranchisement and a sense of oppression. The Kashmiri people in Indian-administered Kashmir are very diverse. There are obviously those who are sympathetic with Pakistan. We've seen video footage over the years demonstrating that. But then there are a lot of people who want to, are not seeking any, sort of extra constitutional step. They want to negotiate. They want to have some form of an autonomy. There are obviously those who say, hey, Kashmir should be independent of Pakistan and India, so that sentiment's still there. But the point that I'm making is that there is an internal problem that these jihadist groups based in Pakistan exploit for their own purposes. And of course, Pakistan has interest as well vis-a-vis Kashmir, and Pakistan sees these groups as proxies to further that interest. So this is a complicated situation. So even if there was to be a crackdown, and we've seen the Pakistanis engage crackdown only to sort of lift it later on, the leaders, as my colleague was saying, they're free to go about making speeches, they're put in jail, then they're released, and this circus continues. But the bottom line is that there is something that Pakistan must do, which is to end this jihadist factory. And then the Indians have to resolve their own issue with the indigenous people inside Indian-administered Kashmir.
Leela Jacinto?
Kamran has raised an extremely important point because, when you're looking at Kashmir and looking at all the geopolitical players, what we overlook is the lives of ordinary Kashmiris. This insurgency and this crackdown has been happening since 1989, and he's absolutely right. The Kashmir is vast and diverse, and there were the Hindu Pandit community has reduced. But on the other hand, as it happens with all these anti-insurgency crackdowns, you have a population that has been living with security forces, paramilitary forces, human rights abuses. And so you then have a situation where parties can exploit the situation. If a local boy is getting, his family is affected by the Indian security forces, then you start having an army from which you can recruit. So, I mean, there has to be responsibility on both sides. And as we see with these long-ranging crises, the extremist wings of both sides, they neatly meet each other's agendas.
Which brings us back to MBS. Can the Saudi Crown Prince, you heard Leela in part one of our discussion, Ambassador, say how the Saudis have good relations with both India and Pakistan. Is there something he can do in this situation?
Just a couple of points. Let me just take the last point which you asked very specifically first, and if you would allow me to just come back to the two earlier points. As I earlier mentioned to you, that insofar as disputes between India and Pakistan are concerned, there is already an agreed mechanism between the two countries to resolve such dispute, which is outlined under Shimla Agreement and under Lahore Declaration. Disputes are bilateral and they must be resolved only bilaterally. So that is insofar as your last point is concerned.
Only bilaterally?
Sorry?
Only bilaterally.
But Pakistan doesn't want that position.
Well, they are signatory to the Shimla Agreement. I'm sure you're aware of that. If I could just come back to the two earlier points which Mr. Bokhari, a very learned scholar from Washington, made, and Madam also made here. I think it is important to understand, that there is a drawing room reality of Jammu and Kashmir, which people talk, but there is also a ground reality of what actually happens in the field. Now, if you look at Jammu and Kashmir, local governance, I mean, let me put it in a larger framework of local governance, which has many variables: health, infrastructure, development, democracy, among others. Now, if you look at that, our last local body elections, which is the most ground-level democratic form elections, they took place just last year in 4,500 panchayat. Panchayat is our locus form of the governance. There were 25,000 candidates, roughly more than 5 million, close to 6 million people voted in those elections with a voting percentage of 75%. So these are the facts. These are not the imaginations or what we think is being happening there. This is the reality which is actually happening. Second point, which I think I must mention purely as a contradiction to what said, we strongly believe that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. On our side, as I said, there are local governance issues for which there is an established mechanism. We are not a banana republic which imposes government on the other people. We are not sure about the other part of Jammu and Kashmir, which is an integral part of us, but not in our physical control as to what is happening in that part of it. So I think that remains the state of the play on the ground. I could not touch upon one point relating to connecting dots, which you mentioned earlier, which Mr. Bokhari also mentioned. You will find that wherever you talk in our region of terrorism, you will find a dot linking it to Pakistan. You talk of Afghanistan, Afghanistan will link it to Pakistan. Talk to Iran, Iran will link it to Pakistan. Where did you find Osama bin Laden? Right in the backyard of Pakistan. Where did you find Al-Zawahiri? Found Pakistan. So, it's like an industry has a supply chain, a country has a supply chain.
Kamran Bokhari, when we look at insurgent groups, terror groups, is it Pakistan you should be looking at, or Saudi Arabia? Because a lot of the reactions on the hashtag F24 debate, the ire has not been directed at Pakistan, but at MBS.
Are you referring to the Iranian anger?
Yes, I'm referring to both Iranian anger and here in the West when they look at this story from outside.
So look, I totally agree with the ambassador. That the state of reality over the last 2 decades, since the 90s, has been that Pakistan has been an enabling environment for terrorists of various stripes. It's no secret Osama bin Laden was found in Pakistan. Al-Qaeda, or the remnants of Al-Qaeda's apex leadership, is still in Pakistan. A lot of that leadership was eliminated, again, in Pakistan's tribal areas. We do have anti-India groups there. There's no hiding that. The Iranians are facing a threat from groups that are also based in another part of Pakistan. So yes, that is true. But at the end of the day, I think that the situation is very complex. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that the Pakistani state has to do something about these various groups. It has to impose its writ on its territory and cannot allow non-state actors to run their independent foreign policy, much less use these groups as instruments of foreign policy. There's no two ways about that. But again, I think that the situation has another side, which is that there's a war in Afghanistan. It's been going on for 40 years. There is a geosectarian battle between the Saudis and the Iranians that's playing out in places like Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and even in Pakistan, as we've seen. The Jaish al-Adl is an anti-Iranian group. The Iranians allege that the government of Saudi Arabia is sponsoring them. We haven't seen any evidence of that, but such groups work to the advantage, even if the Saudis are not supporting them, to the advantage of Riyadh's foreign policy vis-a-vis Tehran. So there is a broader geopolitical context in which all these various non-state actors operate inside of Pakistan.
If I just may, talking about the Saudi issue, this trip by the Crown Prince is his pivot eastwards, because he's faced a backlash after the murder of Saudi dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. You are not going to hear anything about Jamal Khashoggi in the official channels, not in Pakistan, not in India, and not in China. So when you're talking about the anger on Saudi Arabia, there is an international opprobrium to the killing, and this is. Well,
you will from the viewers. One of them said, for instance, because MBS was awarded the highest civilian honor in Pakistan this Monday. Does this highest honor to MBS seem gross after Jamal Khashoggi was brutally murdered and ripped apart? Nice one, Pakistan.
Right. And it must be said that even Pakistani public opinion, the eastern border, India is quite a different issue. But, Imran Khan's government is not very happy because he's got to manage Tehran as well. So, there is real Pakistani anger or disquiet about Pakistan being used as a battleground for anti-Shiite groups in Iran. So, the Pakistani public opinion is quite separate on that. Also, the Pakistani parliament voted against Pakistan joining the Saudi war in Yemen. Pakistan plays a very big role in the Gulf security. So there is no public opinion that is so pro-Saudi Arabia. Of course, the Pakistani press has been playing up this visit, while as the Indian press is actually consumed with what's happening in Kashmir. So I don't think the MBS visit is going to get as much media coverage as it did in Pakistan, because, in India, there are a lot of different stories to follow.
And as Pakistan's prime minister has himself admitted bluntly, Pakistan is hard up for cash. Social media in the country, full of thanks, by the way, to Mohammed bin Salman. First, for the announcement of the release of more than 2,100 of its expatriates from Saudi jails, and that on the back of the $20 billion worth of business pledges from Mohammed bin Salman during this trip. That's double the amount of memorandums of understandings that had originally been anticipated.
Very happy that you came here, because we have just signed these MOUs. And Pakistan and Saudi Arabia are now taking this relationship to a level which we never had before. A relationship where it will now be investment between the two countries, which will mutually benefit from it.
We've been a brotherly country and friendly country to Pakistan, and we've worked together in tough and good times, and we will continue the same thing. Especially that Pakistan facing really great future today with a great leadership.
Jean-Luc Racine, your thoughts listening to the Saudi Crown Prince and to the Pakistani Prime Minister?
Well, it's exact that Narendra Modi has played the card of the Middle East or the Gulf countries since arriving in power, basically for economic reasons, because also there is a large Indian diaspora. Modi went to Riyadh. But obviously, the link between the Saudis and Pakistan is of a completely different nature. Because traditionally, the political leaders are going there when they are in exile. That was the case of Nawaz Sharif. The first trip abroad by Imran Khan was to Riyadh, and he explained why he was going first to Riyadh. Why we may have anticipated that his first trip would have been for China. And I can only repeat what has been said before. Pakistan is a very difficult financial situation. The Saudi had committed before 6 million aid, the Emiratis 6 million, billions. The Emiratis 6 billion as well. If the 20 billions announced today are confirmed, it would be almost the equivalent of what the Chinese are supposed to give, or to give.
To invest.
To invest.
With strings.
Yeah, it's not exactly to give in the so-called China-Pakistan economic corridor. So the stakes are important for India, but they are extremely important for Pakistan. And at the same time, referring again to what was the Indian position, saying we shall diplomatically isolate Pakistan on the question of terrorism. Well, the visit of MBS, in a way, is in contradiction with that, because Pakistan, for the time being, is not isolated. And as I mentioned before, when Bolton is making a harsh statement, it's nothing new. And we may remember that on January 1st of this year, at 4 a.m., Donald Trump sent a tweet which was extremely negative as far as Pakistan is concerned. But today they are happy to discuss with the Pakistani as far as the talks with the Taliban are supposed to be carried on.
Kamran Bokhari, do you agree that there's a bit of bluster in Washington where you are these days? Or have the
Yes,
or has the
look,
relationship changed?
Look, I think that there is a long-standing concern in Washington over Pakistan's behavior towards militant groups. That's still there. That's not gone away. But I think that there is a bigger issue that the United States needs to deal with, and particularly the Trump administration, which is to bring the longest-running war in American history to some form of closure. And for that, they have to deal with Pakistan, and I think that that's what, Secretary Pompeo, when he spoke about, the new opportunity and he met with his Pakistani counterpart, I think that the Americans are saying, well, let's deal with Afghanistan, and for that we need to deal with Pakistan. And so what I'm trying to say here is that for now, those, chronic disagreements with Islamabad are being set aside for a specific goal. And then the question is, what will happen of the Afghan peace process? If there isn't much progress, then we may see a return of Washington's, differences with Pakistan, especially on this issue of the militancy.
All right. Whether or not Afghanistan can be solved, I guess we're going to have to make dates with everyone here on the panel to discuss that one. I want to thank Ambassador Kwatra for being with us. I want to thank as well Jean-Luc Racine, Leela Jacinto, Kamran Bokhari in Washington. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you.